Two little black boys stand in the cold asking to wash a stranger's luxury car for just $10 to buy medicine for their sick mother. But when the billionaire behind the wheel finally looks up, everything changes. What happens next will shake him to his core and might shake you too. Are you watching this in the quiet of night or during a moment of pause in your day? Wherever you are, we're glad you're here. The morning air bit with a sharpness only city winters truly delivered, seeping through the smallest seams in Marvin and Matthew Ronald's oversized sweatshirts. Their breath puffed out in short bursts visible in the cold as their tiny fingers tightened around the red and green plastic buckets they had borrowed from a neighbor downstairs. Matthew, the slightly older of the two at almost 8, had a rag slung over his shoulder like a seasoned mechanic, while Marvin, still 7, clutched a bottle of diluted soap solution they had meticulously mixed using dish soap and water in an old ketchup container. They stood on the concrete sidewalk, dwarfed by the towering glass and steel building that shimmered in the pale light. Luxury cars, sleek and silent, lined the entrance like metallic sentinels of wealth, their polished surfaces reflecting a world the boys could only dream of. Each person passing seemed to move at double speed, eyes fixed on phones, not on the two children trembling beside the gleaming entrance. They did not yell, nor did they beg. They simply stood there, shivering, yet as still as statues, as if their silent desperation might echo louder than any shouted plea. Hope at their tender age was not merely a feeling, it was a desperate act. And today, their act was simple: ask clean, and pray anyone would truly see them. It was Marvin who spotted the car first, a black electric sedan, its lights still blinking softly as it pulled into the lot, slowing near the front steps. The doors opened with that silent, ghost-like grace electric vehicles possess, and out stepped a tall man in a tailored navy suit. His black gloves offered a stark contrast against the coffee cup in his right hand, and dark sunglasses obscured most of his face, though the sharp lines of his features were still discernible beneath his well-kept beard. Matthew nudged his brother with the corner of his bucket. "That's the one," he whispered. Marvin nodded, a shared understanding passing between them, without words, just a synchronized breath. Together they walked forward, carefully stepping to avoid a patch of frost near the curb. Sir Marvin called out, his voice cracking from the cold and an undeniable nervousness. The man paused but did not look down. Sir Matthew echoed louder this time. "We can clean your car, please. Just $10. Our mom, she's sick, and we need medicine." The man, Benjamin James, a billionaire tech CEO, stopped at the building's revolving door, finally turning his head slowly toward the voices behind him. He said nothing at first. He did not need to. His silence hit them like an unyielding wall. Benjamin did not understand why he had turned around. He had heard countless people ask him for things: money, time, opportunities, forgiveness. But this felt different. Perhaps it was the way the smaller boy's voice cracked, or how the taller one held out a half-dry rag as if it were an offering to a king. For a long second he remained silent, his eyes scanning the siblings. Not for danger, for he was not afraid of children, but for authenticity, something real in a world that often presented only facades. He noted the color of their skin, the cheap fabric of their clothes, the rubber bands around their sleeves meant to keep the cold out. "This is a joke, right?" he finally muttered. Matthew shook his head. "No, sir. We're serious." Benjamin glanced back at his luxury sedan, then at the lobby entrance where the elevator awaited. "You're 7?" he asked. Marvin nodded. "Almost 8, Matthew added. Benjamin pulled a crisp $10 bill from his wallet like a man performing a transaction far beneath his pay grade. His fingers hovered for a moment, a slight pause betraying the battle between his growing curiosity and his deeply ingrained impatience. He handed it over without flair, flattening the bill with his thumb before offering it to Marvin. "Make it quick," he said flatly. The tone was transactional, as if he were ordering coffee, but his eyes did not match his voice. There was something else behind them, an unspoken awareness that he had just entered into a contract much more complicated than he understood. Marvin took the bill carefully, as if it were sacred. He looked up. "Thank you, sir. We won't disappoint you." Benjamin grunted, already stepping back toward the passenger side of his sedan. He opened the door and lowered himself into the driver's seat, but did not close it all the way, nor did he drive off. Instead, he sat in silence, glancing at the side mirror. The boys got to work instantly. There was no fumbling, no arguing over who did what. They moved like a well-oiled team, as if they had washed 100 cars together. Benjamin found himself watching, not because he needed to, but because he simply could not look away. Matthew dipped his rag into the bucket with practiced precision, wringing out the excess water before attacking the hood with long, even strokes. Marvin crouched low, scrubbing the rims with a stubbornness Benjamin had not expected from a child so small. The boys' hands, raw from the cold, trembled slightly as they worked, but they did not slow down. They were not playing. They were not pretending. This was not an afternoon chore. It was a mission. Benjamin leaned back in his seat, unsure what to make of the gnawing sensation building in his chest. He was used to people asking for things. Investments favors attention, but those asks always came with hidden motives and calculated smiles. This was different, pure, honest, uncomfortable. As Matthew stood to wipe down the side mirrors, Benjamin noticed the boy's sleeve had a hole in it near the elbow where the fabric had worn thin. Underneath, his skin was red, chapped from exposure. The realization made Benjamin shift in his seat. These boys were not just helping their mother. They were sacrificing themselves for her. He did not know if he admired it or hated it. Hated that the world required such things from children. A gust of wind blew suds off the windshield and onto the pavement, and still they kept working. A couple walked past the scene, the woman clutching her designer purse, and the man looking down at his phone. Neither of them gave the siblings more than a half-second glance. Benjamin noticed. He had walked past suffering before too countless times, homeless tents along the waterfront, kids busking near subway stations, a mother nursing a baby on a milk crate beside a coffee shop. He'd trained himself not to see them. Empathy, after all, was a liability in his line of work. He remembered once during the Series A funding round of his startup, cutting off funding to a struggling partner company because their founder missed one quarterly milestone. That founder had a sick child. Benjamin remembered reading it in an email. He'd shrugged it off. Business was business. But now, watching these boys who did not ask for sympathy, who did not cry or beg or whine, he felt something shift within him. Matthew straightened, walking over with a small towel to dry the door handles. Marvin gave a half-smile, proud of the shine he was achieving on the rear lights. They looked content, not exactly happy, but purposeful. Benjamin's gaze narrowed. $10, that was what this cost him. But what would it cost him not to care? When they finished, Marvin stepped forward, first rubbing his cold hands together while trying to look professional. "We did the best we could, sir," he said. "The soap's kinda cheap, but it still works okay." Matthew nodded beside him, arms folded, cheeks flushed. Benjamin stepped out of the car, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve before inspecting the vehicle. He walked around it slowly, his shoes echoing on the wet pavement. The sedan glistened under the cloud-filtered sun, not spotless, but clean enough to turn heads. "Not bad," he muttered. The boys watched his every move with the tension of two kids awaiting a teacher's grade. Then Benjamin did something they did not expect. He crouched down to Matthew's level and looked him directly in the eyes. "What's your mom's name?" he asked. Matthew blinked. "Carolyn." Benjamin nodded. "And what's wrong with her?" Marvin answered, more guarded now. "She's got something in her lungs. The doctor said she needs antibiotics, but we haven't bought them yet." Benjamin stared at them both, measuring their responses with the instincts of a man who'd interviewed hundreds of professionals. "No lies, just need." He exhaled and stood up again, brushing his hands together like he'd finished a deal. But it was not a deal, not really. It was a question he did not know how to stop asking. Why these boys? Why now? Benjamin stepped away from the car and pulled out his wallet again. He hesitated, then drew another $10 bill, then another. He folded them together and extended the small stack toward Matthew, who looked surprised. "That's too much, sir," the boy said quickly. "We said 10. Benjamin smiled faintly, his first smile in days. "I'm paying a bonus," he said dryly. "Good work deserves more." Matthew hesitated but finally took the bills, cradling them like they were made of gold. Marvin stepped closer, a mixture of gratitude and confusion in his eyes. "Thank you. We'll go straight to the pharmacy, I promise." Benjamin gave a short nod. He was not sure what made him say the next words, but they came out without hesitation. "Where do you live?" The boys froze for a second, unsure if it was a threat or a question. Then Matthew pointed toward a row of old apartment buildings in the distance near that corner, the brown one with the peeling blue door. Benjamin took note. He did not respond, just opened his car door and slid back into the seat. But as he drove away, his thoughts were not on quarterly reports or investor decks. They were back there on the boys, the $10 contract, and a promise he had not made, but somehow already intended to keep. and as the sedan pulled out onto the road, Benjamin glanced in the rearview mirror. The boys were still standing there. One of them waved. Benjamin did not wave back, but his hand did twitch slightly on the wheel, as if resisting a reflex he did not want to admit he had. Benjamin had not intended to speak again after paying the boys. He'd already said more than he usually did in an entire morning. But something about the way they stood there still watching him even after the money had changed hands would not let him drive away. He rolled the passenger side window down slowly and leaned across the seat. "Hey!" he called out. The boys turned. He motioned for them to come closer. They hesitated only a second before jogging over, still holding the damp rags and dripping towels. Benjamin leaned out the window slightly. "Why are you really doing this?" His voice was not skeptical, but softer now, probing, not accusing. Marvin stepped forward first, opening his mouth, and then closing it again. It was Matthew who answered. "Our mom is sick. Like bad sick." Benjamin tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "Sick how?" Marvin swallowed hard, eyes darting to the sidewalk. "We heard the doctor say there's fluid in her lungs that it could turn into pneumonia. He gave her a paper with the name of the medicine, but it costs more than we have. So," he held up his rag, "we're working." Benjamin did not speak. A strange tightness took hold in his throat, unfamiliar and unwelcome. The silence between them thickened, but it was not empty. It pulsed with something fragile and raw, like a thread stretched too tight. Benjamin finally cleared his throat and spoke, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Where's your dad?" It was not a nosy question. It came from instinct, from a businessman's need to understand all the variables. Matthew looked down at his shoes. "He left last year, said he'd come back when things were better. He didn't. He used to yell a lot," Marvin added. "Mom says it's good he's gone, but now she can't work." Benjamin's fingers tightened slightly around the wheel. The boys did not embellish or dramatize. They delivered the facts with the bluntness of those who've lived through too much to sugarcoat anything. He glanced down at their hands again, wet red, trembling from the cold. "You two ever eat breakfast today?" he asked suddenly. The question caught them off guard. Marvin hesitated. "We had crackers and some juice." Matthew nodded quickly as if afraid that denying it would make Benjamin take the money back. Benjamin sighed, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have to do this," he muttered under his breath, mostly to himself, but the boys heard. Benjamin turned the engine off. He stepped out of the car, slowly locking eyes with both of them as he approached the curb. The city noise droned behind them, honking taxis, murmuring crowds, the rhythmic beat of shoes on concrete. But in that small circle of sidewalk, it all felt distant. "Come sit," he said, pointing toward a nearby bench sheltered under the building's overhang. The boys followed, sitting side by side, damp rags bundled at their feet. Benjamin did not sit immediately. He stood in front of them, arms crossed, as if studying a puzzle he had not yet solved. "How long have you been doing this?" Marvin looked up uncertain. "The car washing this week is our first. We saw a guy doing it downtown and thought maybe we could too." Matthew added, "We tried selling our toys last week, but people just looked at us weird." Some laughed. Benjamin finally sat, a heavy sigh escaping as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He stared straight ahead. "You know, when I was your age, my mom used to clean houses. I helped sometimes. It was never enough." That last sentence slipped out before he could catch it. He did not mean to say it, but it lingered in the air like smoke. Marvin tilted his head. "What happened to your mom?" Benjamin did not answer right away. He was not used to being asked questions, especially not ones that mattered. After a pause, he replied quietly, "She passed away a long time ago." The boys were silent. Children often instinctively knew when not to press, and they did not. Benjamin straightened up. "What's your mom's name again?" Matthew said it first this time. "Carolyn." Benjamin nodded, committing it to memory. "And where exactly do you live?" They gave the street, the apartment number, even the color of the chipped door. Benjamin's mind was already building the picture. He could see it forming the dim hallways, the shared walls, the peeling linoleum floors. He'd grown up in places like that, though he had buried those memories beneath a $1,000,000 view and a penthouse fridge that stocked itself. The guilt crept in quietly, as it always did when he saw people stuck in cycles he had escaped from. He looked at the boys again, not just for who they were, but for who they could be if someone bothered to see them. "You did good work today," he said almost formally, "but this shouldn't be your job. Let me see what I can do." Matthew looked confused, like, "Give us more cars to wash." Benjamin let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, not that." He stood again and fished into his coat pocket, pulling out a sleek leather business card case. He flipped it open, took out a card, and handed it to Marvin. "If anything happens, if your mom gets worse, or if someone tries to hurt you, call that number. That goes straight to my office." The boys stared at it like it was a golden ticket. "Why are you helping us?" Marvin asked, his voice small. Benjamin did not answer right away. He looked past them at the crowd, at the sky, at something far away. "Because someone should have helped me, and no one did." He reached into his wallet again and handed them another $50 bill. "Go get your mom what she needs." Marvin reached for it with both hands, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Mr. James?" "Benjamin," he said. "Benjamin James." The name meant nothing to them, and that somehow felt good. For once, he was not a CEO or a headline. He was just a man who stopped to listen. As he walked back toward his car, the boys stayed on the bench holding the card, the cash, and something far more rare, the feeling that they had finally been seen. Benjamin drove off slower, this time his hands loose on the wheel. The city felt less aggressive than usual. He did not have a plan, not yet, but something had shifted. He'd built empires on logic, on metrics, on smart bets. But what he felt now, this pull toward two boys with nothing to offer him but a story. It was not logical, it was not efficient, but it was real. And in a world filled with facades, that was worth everything. Benjamin James was not a man given to spontaneous decisions, but as the skyline passed by in reflections across his windshield, he knew this was not the end of his interaction with Marvin and Matthew. It was the beginning. And somewhere deep inside, he hoped that helping them might help him recover a piece of himself he did not even realize was missing. Benjamin told himself it was curiosity, not concern. That's what he repeated silently as he parked a block away and crossed the street on foot. It was not that he did not trust them. He did more than most adults he dealt with daily. But something in him, something buried and restless, needed to see where these boys went when they disappeared into the crowd. They had not noticed he was following. They were too busy talking softly between themselves, taking turns holding the folded $50 bill like it was a fragile treasure. Benjamin kept a respectful distance, dodging cyclists and cracked pavement. His expensive shoes were not quite suited to the worn-down sidewalks of the Tenderloin. The buildings here bore their history in rust and graffiti, but it was not the decay that struck him. It was the resilience, children's drawings taped to windows, makeshift gardens in milk crates. And there, near the end of the block, the boys turned into a building with peeling paint and a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges, blue like they'd said. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside the entryway, careful not to let the door slam. The air inside was thick with mildew and dust. Each step up the narrow stairwell echoed louder than it should have. The hallway was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb overhead. The sound of a distant television and someone arguing behind a closed door lent the place a kind of unspoken tension, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marvin and Matthew stopped outside a unit near the far end and knocked twice. No key, just a knock. A faint voice called, "Come in," followed by a brief coughing fit. Benjamin slowed his pace and waited around the corner, unsure if this counted as trespassing or something far more personal. He waited a beat, then approached cautiously, stopping at the partially open door. What he saw struck him harder than expected. The room was small, tiny, really a studio unit, no larger than his office's private bathroom. A narrow mattress lay against the wall where a pale woman with sunken cheeks and tired eyes sat propped up by pillows, struggling to sit upright. Carolyn. There was no television, no kitchen table, just a small shelf with a few canned goods, a microwave, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. But it was clean, spotless even. Every corner had been swept, the few dishes stacked neatly, the towels folded with care. It was dignity without comfort, survival without rest. Carolyn smiled faintly as the boys entered her eyes, lighting up in spite of the dark circles beneath them. "Hey, my loves," she rasped, her voice weak but full of warmth. Matthew rushed to her side and knelt down, pulling a small bottle of water from his backpack and pressing it into her hands. "We got the money. Mama A-Man helped us. He gave us 50. Marvin added quickly, "And he said we can call him if anything bad happens." Carolyn blinked, surprised, but too tired to question it. 50, she repeated as if the number was absurd. Who gave you that?" And that's when Benjamin stepped into the frame, casting a long shadow on the hardwood floor. He cleared his throat. The boys turned, startled, but did not speak. Carolyn tried to sit up straighter, coughing again as she adjusted the blanket over her lap. "I did," Benjamin said gently. "My name's Benjamin James. I met your boys downtown. They washed my car." Carolyn studied him with weary eyes, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid. "You followed them?" she asked, her voice cautious. Benjamin nodded slowly. "Yes, I needed to see for myself." Matthew stood up and stepped between Benjamin and the bed, small arms outstretched like a shield. "Sir, you came to see if we stole the money." His voice was neither angry nor scared, just disappointed like a child whose trust had been cracked. Benjamin's chest tightened, and for a long second he could not speak. Then he crouched down, eye level with the boy. "No," he said finally, "I believe you. I just didn't believe the world could be this unfair, and I needed to see where brave boys like you come from." Matthew hesitated, then lowered his arms slightly. Carolyn was watching all of it unfold, her eyes, now glossy, not from fear, but from shame. "I don't want pity," she said softly. "I work when I can. I've cleaned houses, stocked shelves, waitressed. I'm just sick right now, that's all. I'll get better." Benjamin nodded, his tone softening. "I didn't come to judge. I came to understand. And maybe to help." Carolyn's expression shifted confusion, giving way to exhaustion, then cautious gratitude. Marvin moved toward the nightstand and pulled out the prescription note, crumpled but legible. "This is what she needs," he said. Benjamin reached for it without hesitation. The room fell silent as Benjamin stood and read the note. He recognized the name of the antibiotic standard, but not cheap when you did not have insurance. He folded it carefully and looked to Carolyn. "Do you mind if I get this for you?" he asked. The simplicity of the question made it heavier. Carolyn hesitated, pride and practicality at war behind her eyes. She nodded, but slowly. "If you want," she whispered. Benjamin looked down at Marvin and Matthew. "Come with me." The boys nodded without question. As they left, Carolyn called out after them, voice barely strong enough to carry across the room. "Thank you, Mr. James. Just Benjamin," he said, turning at the door. "And I'll be back." As the door closed behind them, the hallway seemed even darker than before. But in Benjamin's chest, something glowed faintly like a small match lit in a cave. He was not a doctor or a priest or a hero, but today he was something else. A man who decided to stay a man, who followed the story past the surface, and maybe just maybe a man who had finally stopped running from his own past. Benjamin did not drive straight home after leaving the boys at the pharmacy. Instead, he parked at a quiet overlook by Twin Peaks, where the city unfolded beneath him like a glowing circuit board pulsing with a life of its own. He turned off the engine but did not leave the car. Instead, he sat still, one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, the other clutching the folded prescription note like it was a letter from a ghost. The silence in the car was thick. No podcasts, no calls, no music, just the ambient hum of his own memories rising without permission. He had not thought of her in years, not really. But now, as if summoned by the face of a sick woman in a one-room apartment and two boys who looked at him like he was something he no longer believed he was, she came rushing back, his mother, Daniela James. A woman who had raised him alone, who had worked her fingers raw for a son who barely looked back once the funding rounds began. He remembered her laugh, soft and warm, and the way she'd say his full name when he stayed up too late studying Benjamin Michael James, close that laptop, and eat something. She had gotten sick slowly, quietly, as if trying not to inconvenience him with her deterioration. First it was fatigue, then breathlessness, then hospital visits. By the time Benjamin noticed, she was already carrying around oxygen tanks and slipping into coughing fits that left her too tired to stand. But Benjamin was busy, always busy. He was building a dream, after all, launching his company, securing investors, taking meetings in New York, then Tokyo, then back to Palo Alto. He'd call when he could, text when he remembered, and she'd always say the same thing, even as her voice thinned out. "I'm proud of you. Don't worry about me." The day she died, Benjamin was on a red-eye to London for a keynote presentation. He found out hours after landing in an airport lounge, staring at a text from the nurse. "I'm sorry for your loss." He did not cry. He did not scream. He just sat there hollow and stunned like someone had unplugged him. The guilt came later, sudden, suffocating, and merciless. But by then it was too late to apologize, too late to be the son she needed instead of the man the world demanded. As Benjamin sat in his luxury sedan, now staring at the city he helped shape with his ambition, he realized how little of it meant anything without someone to come home to. He had climbed every ladder, checked every box, won every game, but for what a penthouse so quiet it echoed dinner reservations, made for one, awards and plaques lining the wall, none of which ever looked at him with love in their eyes. What haunted him most was not the fact that his mother had died alone. It was the knowledge that in some unspoken way she had accepted it, forgiven him before he even asked. That kind of grace cut deeper than any accusation. He thought of Carolyn's frail smile, of how she'd thanked him without letting go of her dignity. He thought of Matthew stepping between them, not afraid, but protective of Marvin, offering the crumpled prescription with more hope than Benjamin had seen in years. These were not just memories forming. They were indictments of everything he had ignored, everything he had missed, while chasing what he thought mattered, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at redemption he had not expected. He reached into the glove box and pulled out an old leather journal. It was something he used years ago during therapy before he'd abandoned the sessions, claiming they were a waste of strategic time. The pages were mostly blank, but a few had scribbled entries from darker moments: his mother's funeral, the day he closed his first deal, and one entry, dated exactly 1 year after her death, reading only, "I failed her." He stared at that sentence inked in his own hand and ran his thumb across the page. Maybe he could not change the past, but he could face it now. He could allow himself to feel the weight instead of dodging it with flights and briefings and billion-dollar mergers. He could do more than toss money at problems from a distance. For the first time in years, Benjamin realized how dangerous avoidance was, how easily it dressed itself up as ambition. He leaned his head back against the headrest and closed his eyes. Carolyn was not his mother. Marvin and Matthew were not his sons, but they were someone's whole world. And maybe for a little while he could help carry that world so it did not collapse. When he opened his eyes again, it was already dark. The streetlights bathed the city in orange hues, and the skyline blinked like a heartbeat in the distance. Benjamin picked up his phone, scrolled through his contact list, and paused. He hovered over a name he had not touched in years: Dr. Hamilton, a palliative care specialist he had met during his mother's final months. With a deep breath, he dialed. The voice on the other end was groggy, caught off guard. "Benjamin, I haven't heard from you in—" "I need a favor," Benjamin interrupted gently. "It's not for me. It's for a woman. Her name is Carolyn. She's sick. She has 2 kids, and she needs— and more than antibiotics." There was a pause, then the voice softened. "Send me the address." Benjamin hung up, wrote it down, and stared at the screen for a moment longer. For the first time in what felt like a decade, he did not feel powerless. He felt present, anchored, ready. Redemption was not loud. It did not arrive with fanfare or applause. Sometimes it came quietly in a hallway of a broken apartment, in the eyes of 2 brave boys, in the memory of a mother who had loved him despite it all. Benjamin finally started the car again, but this time there was no rush. He was not late for anything that mattered more than this. He was not running from Ghost. He was walking beside them, learning from their silence. The past did not go away, he realized. It did not forgive you just because you succeeded, but it also did not have to define what came next. As the engine hummed and the headlights cut through the fog, Benjamin felt something settle in him. Not peace exactly, but the beginning of it. The past was not undone. His mother was still gone. The time lost would never be returned. But now he had a chance to give what he could not give her: time, presence, care. Not to fix the world, but to change one part of it, one life at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The next morning, Benjamin sat across from his chief financial officer in the corner office of his high-rise, sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows. On the desk lay a thin stack of papers officially labeled as a Community Outreach Expansion Initiative. Unofficially, it was a quiet lifeline disguised under the sleek umbrella of corporate responsibility. "It's just a one-off donation," Benjamin said, tapping his pen against the form. "A small health grant. No press releases, no media. Just do it quietly." The CFO glanced over the numbers and raised an eyebrow. "This is a personal matter." Benjamin did not flinch. "No, it's a community matter. As far as the books are concerned, it's just another goodwill project. Assign it under the local health program. I want the funds allocated by the end of the day." The man nodded slowly, sensing this was not open for negotiation. Benjamin signed the documents with swift finality and stood up. His suit was pressed, his tie immaculate, but something was different about him now. His posture carried less weight, as if something had been lifted. "Have my driver cancel the board lunch," he added as he walked out. "I've got another appointment." "Where?" Not the Ritz, not the stock exchange. No, he was going back to that one-room apartment with books, clothes, and a soccer ball. At Carolyn's apartment, the siblings were already waiting outside on the curb, swinging their legs on the front steps like they had nowhere to be, but also like they were exactly where they wanted to be. Matthew saw him first and nudged his brother. He came back, he whispered as if afraid the moment might vanish if spoken too loud. Benjamin stepped out of the SUV with a reusable grocery bag in one hand and a backpack in the other. "Morning," he said, handing Matthew a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Warm croissants and real orange juice, not the powdered stuff. Marvin opened the backpack to find 3 new jackets, still with tags on. "Whoa, these are real." Benjamin smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Unless I hallucinated a Nordstrom at 7 a.m., yeah, they're real." Carolyn appeared at the door, leaning on the frame, but more upright than before. Her eyes, though tired, shimmered with something between surprise and cautious gratitude. "Mr. James, you didn't have to." "Benjamin," he corrected gently, "and I didn't do anything. This is just part of our corporate outreach." He winked at the siblings, who grinned back. No one bought the formality, but everyone appreciated the attempt to protect their pride. Later that afternoon, Benjamin found himself in the middle of a makeshift soccer match in the cracked parking lot behind the building. Matthew had drawn goalposts in chalk on the concrete, and Marvin was arguing loudly and passionately about whether Benjamin's last kick had counted. "You were over the line," Marvin insisted, laughing. "Not even close," Benjamin replied, arms raised in mock indignation. "I've been playing since you were in diapers." "You're still slow," Matthew teased, dodging past him with the ball. For the first time in what felt like decades, Benjamin laughed genuinely deeply. Not the polite chuckles reserved for business dinners or shareholder jokes, but a real full-bodied laugh that made his stomach tighten and his eyes water. Neighbors watched from their windows. Some smiled, others simply blinked in disbelief at the sight of a man in a tailored blazer kicking a ball with children in a rundown lot. For Benjamin, the world had momentarily shrunk into this joyful, chaotic rectangle of pavement. The past faded, the future did not matter. Only the present existed. Marvin, chasing Matthew the ball, skidding wildly. Carolyn watching from the steps with a hand over her heart. This was not charity. This was not guilt. This was life. In the evenings, Benjamin returned not just with food or clothing, but with books, children's stories, science kits, old graphic novels from his own childhood, things he had long forgotten but suddenly remembered as essential. Matthew took to them, eagerly devouring each page like it was a secret map. Marvin preferred to act them out, turning the living room into a stage for pirates and astronauts. Benjamin read to them sometimes, his voice stumbling at first, but gradually finding its rhythm. He did not realize how much he missed storytelling, not the kind with profit margins and keynote slides, but the kind that transported you to impossible worlds with only a few well-chosen words. Carolyn would sit on the mattress smiling softly as the sound of laughter and imagination filled the apartment. Her cough had lessened, the color slowly returning to her cheeks. "You're good with them," she said one night. Benjamin shrugged. "I had to grow up fast. Maybe I'm just catching up." She looked at him for a long moment, as if seeing past the suits and titles. "Whatever it is, thank you." He did not know how to respond, so he just smiled and kept reading. Benjamin's visits were not scheduled, and they were not long. Sometimes just enough to drop off food, other times he stayed for hours. But they became consistent, reliable. The boys started to expect him rushing to the window at the sound of tires or organizing their few toys in preparation. Carolyn began keeping an extra plate on the counter. Neighbors started recognizing his face, nodding in quiet approval. The neighborhood did not ask why he was there. They just noticed that something had changed. The millionaire who once moved too fast to notice anyone was now the man who paused to fix a broken shelf in Carolyn's kitchen or help Matthew with his homework. He did not call it giving back. He did not name it at all. But with each day, Benjamin found that the sharp corners inside him were softening, that the emptiness he had mistaken for peace was finally filling. Not with things, but with people with purpose, with laughter in a cold parking lot, and the knowledge that maybe for the first time, he was not saving someone, he was being saved too. And in this quiet transformation, Benjamin discovered something far deeper than philanthropy. He found a rhythm, a grounding. He realized that help was not a single act, it was a way of being a presence. And what he offered the boys and their mother was not just resources, but reliability, something their world had lacked for far too long. And perhaps even more importantly, they offered him the same in return, an open door, unfiltered honesty, and the kind of affection that was not transactional or strategic, but real. As Benjamin sat again on the front step beside Matthew, watching Marvin attempt a handstand on a patch of dry grass, he smiled. Not the kind crafted for press photos, but one born of quiet joy, the kind of smile that said, "I'm home." The scent of fresh bread and soup lingered in Carolyn's apartment as spring rolled in, quietly softening the cold edges of winter. Weeks had turned into months, and color had returned to her cheeks, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The medicine had worked, but so had the stability of full fridge-warm jacket schoolbooks on the shelf. Benjamin's visits were still frequent, though less as a benefactor and more as a constant presence, someone the boys could count on, someone Carolyn had learned to trust. The laughter had returned too, not just from the siblings, but from Carolyn herself. It was in this rare moment of peace that the knock came. Not Benjamin's knock. His was always light, accompanied by the creak of grocery bags and the sound of Matthew racing to the door. No, this one was firmer, familiar, but wrong. Carolyn froze mid-stir at the tiny stove. Matthew looked up from his coloring book. Marvin instinctively stepped closer to her side. When she opened the door, the past stood there. Frank, taller than she remembered, thinner, with a trimmed beard and a duffel bag over one shoulder. "Hey," he said simply with a lopsided smile, "I'm back." And just like that, the warmth in the room evaporated. For a long moment, Carolyn did not speak. Her hands gripped the doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. The boys stood behind her, stunned into silence. "Frank," she finally whispered, her voice caught between disbelief and caution. He nodded, stepping inside uninvited, his eyes scanning the small apartment that no longer felt like it belonged to him. "You look good. Better." His tone tried for lightness, but it did not land. Carolyn took a step back, and Marvin moved to stand in front of Matthew, a silent protector. "Where were you?" she asked. Her voice was not angry, but tired, worn out. "State," he said, "trying to figure things out. Rehab, counseling, working construction up north." He dropped his bag by the door, as if to signal permanence. "I came back because I want to be a father again. I want to help." Carolyn blinked hard, fighting back emotion. "After a year," she said, "you think you can just walk in and pick up where you left off?" Frank's jaw tensed, but he raised both hands. "I know I messed up. I know I left when I shouldn't have. But I'm different now. I want to be here." It was the first time Matthew had heard his voice in over a year, and yet it felt like a stranger had entered their home. Benjamin arrived just after dusk, carrying a box of secondhand chapter books and a pack of fresh apples. He sensed the tension before he knocked. The apartment's lights were dimmed, the curtains slightly ajar, shadows moving within, like actors waiting for a cue. When the door opened, it was not Carolyn or the boys who greeted him, but Frank. The two men stared at each other for a beat too long, both silently sizing up the other. "Can I help you?" Frank asked, casual but guarded. Benjamin's jaw tightened. "I was just dropping these off for the boys." His eyes darted past Frank's shoulder, scanning for Carolyn. Frank stepped aside. "Come in." The air was different, heavily charged. Carolyn sat on the bed, arms folded, eyes unreadable. Marvin sat close to her, Matthew in the corner, fiddling with a broken toy, unusually quiet. Benjamin set the box down gently. "Everything okay?" he asked. Carolyn hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "This is Frank. He's their father." The words tasted foreign in her mouth. Benjamin gave a short nod. "I see." He turned to Frank. "And you've decided to come back?" Frank did not flinch. "I have. Permanently." Benjamin's stare was polite but piercing. He had built companies from instincts, and right now, every fiber told him something was wrong. Benjamin did not voice his suspicions that night. He knew better than to invade with accusations or create scenes in front of the children. But something about Frank did not sit right, too polished, too rehearsed. He claimed humility, but there was a gleam in his eye that felt transactional, opportunistic. Benjamin had seen that same gleam in failed CEOs who smiled too wide before a hostile takeover. So he said goodnight, politely exchanged a few words with Carolyn outside the building, and then drove home, not to rest, but to dig. That night, with the city glowing outside his penthouse, Benjamin launched an investigation the way only someone with his resources could. Public records, employment history, arrest logs, medical licensing databases. Within hours, a different story began to take shape. Frank had left town, yes, but not just for rehab. He'd been in and out of court for unpaid debts, suspected of involvement in a small-scale fraud scheme involving disability claims. There were gaps in his employment, conflicting addresses, no confirmed rehab center, no proof of steady income. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, lips pressed tight. This was not a father returning in redemption. This was someone seeing an opportunity. And Benjamin refused to let that opportunity come at the cost of those boys' safety. The next morning, Benjamin did not go into the office. Instead, he returned to the apartment wearing no suit, no pretense, just clarity. Carolyn answered the door, her hair tied back, fatigue heavier than usual on her face. "He's out getting groceries," she said before Benjamin could ask. Benjamin stepped inside and closed the door gently. "We need to talk." He sat across from her at the small kitchen table, hands folded. I looked into Frank. Carolyn tensed. "You had no right." "I had every reason," he interrupted, not harshly, but firmly. "Because I care about your kids. And you." He told her everything, the debts, the lies, the inconsistencies. Carolyn did not argue, she did not defend. She just sat very still, absorbing the weight of truth she had likely suspected, but did not want to confirm. "He said he changed," she whispered. "He says he wants to try." "Maybe he does," Benjamin replied, "but wanting isn't enough. The boys have been safe, happy, healing. You've rebuilt so much. Don't let someone tear it down with words." Carolyn rubbed her temples, eyes closed. "What am I supposed to do? Deny them a father?" Benjamin's voice softened. "You're supposed to protect them, even if it means protecting them from someone they used to love." When Frank returned that afternoon with a plastic bag of canned goods and dollar store snacks, he was met not with resistance, but quiet distance. Carolyn did not meet his eyes. The boys did not jump up. They stayed seated, watching, observing, sensing the shift. Frank looked around the room, confused. "Everything okay?" he asked. No one answered. Benjamin stood and approached him slowly. "We need to talk outside." Frank hesitated, then followed. Out in the hallway, Benjamin did not threaten him. He did not raise his voice. He simply handed him a manila envelope. Inside were copies of every document Benjamin had found, every debt, every failed address, every legal record. Frank stared at the papers, then at Benjamin. "You think money makes you a hero," he snapped. Benjamin did not blink. "No. But lying to a woman and 2 kids who just got back on their feet makes you something else entirely." Frank looked away, jaw clenched. Benjamin leaned in slightly. "You want to be a father? Prove it. Start by leaving until you have more than promises to offer." Frank did not respond. He just turned and walked down the stairs. Carolyn watched from the window, tears streaming silently. Benjamin returned inside, sat with the boys, and picked up a storybook. Life had tested them again, but they were still standing together. The next few days passed with an eerie stillness. Frank did not return, not to visit, not to explain, not even to fight. It was the kind of silence that made Benjamin uneasy. In his experience, men like Frank did not vanish quietly unless they were regrouping. Carolyn tried to move forward, grateful for the clarity Benjamin had provided, but he could tell she was still looking over her shoulder. The boys returned to their usual selves in small increments. Matthew resumed his drawings. Marvin went back to practicing soccer kicks in the parking lot. But Benjamin noticed the way they jumped when a car door slammed, or how they instinctively looked at their mother whenever someone knocked. Benjamin, unwilling to let paranoia rule, quietly hired a private investigator to continue monitoring Frank's movements. What the investigator uncovered made Benjamin's skin crawl. Frank had visited a known loan shark only 2 days prior and had been spotted at a local law office trying to file for financial guardianship of his children. He was claiming Carolyn was unfit and that he, as their sole male guardian, deserved access to government support and, more importantly, child assistance funds. Benjamin could not sleep that night. His instincts had been correct. This was not about fatherhood. It was about leverage. The moment Benjamin saw the legal claim Frank had tried to file something in him, snapped not in anger, but in resolve. This had gone beyond irresponsibility. It had crossed into exploitation. He paced his office well past midnight, flipping through every piece of evidence, the debt records, the surveillance photos, the falsified work history. Then he pulled out something he'd been keeping for just such a moment, his lawyer's direct number. Within hours, Benjamin had a legal team drafting a file for emergency petition, compiling every shred of documentation into a report, so thorough it left no room for argument. Simultaneously, he contacted Carolyn and explained everything, gently guiding her step by step through what would come next. She was overwhelmed, tears flowing freely, but she stood tall. "I'll do whatever I have to," she said. "He's not taking them." Benjamin nodded. "He won't." Together, they met with Child Protective Services and presented the file. The social worker, a sharp-eyed woman with years of experience, reviewed the material quietly, then looked up and said, "Ms. Carolyn, based on this evidence, I'll be filing for an emergency order of provisional custody in your name until this is resolved in court. The boys stay with you, and Frank won't get within 100 feet. But Frank did not know that yet. Frank returned 2 nights later. It was late, just past 10 o'clock. Carolyn and the boys had already gone to bed when the banging started, loud, aggressive, shaking the door on its hinges. Matthew screamed from the back room, and Marvin ran to his mother's bed, shaking her. Carolyn grabbed her phone, dialing Benjamin before even thinking of calling 911. "He's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's pounding the door." Benjamin was already in his car. He lived 20 minutes away but drove like it was 5. Meanwhile, Frank shouted from the hallway, "I have a right to see them," he yelled. "They're mine." Carolyn opened the damn door. His voice was slurred, drunk, angry, desperate. Then came the worst part, silence. The knocking stopped. Carolyn clutched her sons tighter, whispering to stay down, stay quiet. She did not realize Frank had gone around the building until they heard the rattle of the back window. "Stay here," she told the boys, locking them in the bathroom. She ran to the window, just as Benjamin pulled up tires, screeching from the street. He saw Frank halfway through the open window, one leg inside the kitchen. Without hesitation, Benjamin sprinted. "Step away from the house," he shouted, just as sirens flared in the distance. The police had already been dispatched. Benjamin had called them before even leaving his driveway. As officers rounded the corner with flashlights drawn and voices booming, Frank froze mid-climb. Hands up, step back. The scene unfolded in chaos. Carolyn screamed from the hallway. The boys peeked through the bathroom door. Benjamin, panting but steady, stayed between Frank and the entrance. "Don't move," he said coldly, locking eyes with the man who had almost ripped this fragile piece apart. Frank snarled, "You rich bastard. You think you can take my family." Benjamin did not answer. He did not have to. The officers cuffed Frank on the sidewalk, reading his rights, as he spit curses into the air. But Benjamin was focused on Carolyn, who had collapsed to her knees, sobbing, holding both boys in her arms. He rushed inside, crouching beside them. "You're safe," he murmured. "He's gone now. He won't hurt you again." The social worker arrived minutes later, as did an emergency family court liaison with all documents in hand and Frank in custody. The court signed the temporary custody order on the spot. Carol now had full legal protection. What was meant to be a quiet night turned into a courtroom victory carved in urgency and fear. Back at his apartment later that night, Benjamin did not sleep. He stood on the balcony watching the city flicker, wondering how many families were living in fear like that. How many mothers had no one to call? How many children had no one to step in? What had begun months ago as a random encounter with 2 boys and a bucket of soap had turned into a full-scale battle for safety, for dignity, for justice. And yet, Benjamin did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man doing what he should have done long ago for his own mother, for every kid who'd ever felt abandoned. His phone buzzed a message from Carol, "Thank you for everything. The boys are asleep. I think they finally feel safe." Benjamin replied simply, "So do I." Then, for the first time in his adult life, he allowed himself to cry, not from regret, but from release. This was not over. Court dates would come, paperwork healing. But tonight they had won something precious, the right to rest, the right to breathe without fear. And that, Benjamin realized, was more powerful than any merger or milestone he had ever known. Spring turned to early summer, and with it came a kind of rebirth that could not be measured in just seasons. Carolyn, once pale and coughing beneath the weight of illness and fear, now walked with strength in her step. Her hair had regained its shine, her cheeks their color, and her smile, though still cautious, came easier and more often. The courtroom battles had ended in her favor, thanks to Benjamin's unwavering support and the mountain of truth he'd assembled. With temporary custody solidified and a restraining order placed firmly on Frank, the darkness had receded. What replaced it was not immediate joy, but peace, stability, a calmness that had once felt like a luxury. Benjamin helped her gently re-enter the working world, setting her up with flexible hours at a boutique office space. His company funded a non-profit hub where she now coordinated outreach events and educational programs. "It's not charity," he told her one day when she hesitated. "It's a partnership, and you've already proven how much you can give." Carolyn did not argue. She accepted the offer not as a handout, but as a hand extended. She walked through those office doors as a woman who had not just survived, but rebuilt. Marvin and Matthew, now 8, bloomed in ways no one could have predicted. Matthew had taken a liking to books, mystery adventures especially, and Benjamin often brought him new titles every other weekend. Marvin had grown taller, louder, more confident. He played soccer at a local recreation center, now his kicks more precise, his laughter echoing through chain-link fences like music. Both boys had their own beds now, their own desks, and thanks to Benjamin's quiet investment, an education fund that would someday carry them further than the sidewalk corner where their story began. But perhaps the most meaningful change was something less tangible. Their trust in the world had been slowly, patiently restored. Benjamin became more than a friend to them. After months of presence and consistency, Carolyn made it official. She asked him to be their godfather. He did not cry when she asked, not in front of them, but his voice cracked when he said yes. And from that moment, the boys introduced him differently. This is Benjamin Matthew would say to neighbors or teachers, our godfather. He's the one who helped save our mom. And every time Benjamin heard it, something inside him, something buried since childhood, stood taller. Benjamin, too, had changed. His mornings no longer began with aggressive alarms and stock market briefings. They began slower with calls to Carolyn or surprise breakfast dropped off at their door. His penthouse, once a silent symbol of success, felt less like home and more like a shell. So he spent more time where life felt real in that one-bedroom apartment that now buzzed with laughter and warmth. But his vision extended beyond that small space. What had started as an act of help had grown into a calling. One morning, sitting in a cafe after walking the boys to school, Benjamin took out a blank notepad and began sketching an idea. He would start a foundation, one that funded emergency medical aid, temporary housing, and educational programs for families in crisis. No bureaucracy, no red tape, immediate action when it was needed most. He named it the Blue Door Initiative after the color of Carolyn's apartment entrance. To him, that door symbolized hope, a simple frame that led into a world where love and struggle coexisted and where one decision could change everything. When he announced the foundation to his board, it was not with a press release or gala, but with quiet conviction. We're going to do something real, he said, and they believed him. That Sunday, the sun rose over the city with the kind of golden light that photographers dream of and poets chase. Benjamin arrived at Carolyn's with no briefcase, no schedule, just a bucket of soap, 4 sponges, and a wide grin. I figured it's time we relived some memories, he said, popping the trunk of his luxury sedan. The boys ran out barefoot, already laughing. You're not going to cry again when I win, are you? Marvin teased. Benjamin feigned offense. I'll have you know, I've been training. I watched 3 car washing tutorials this morning. Carolyn shook her head, leaning against the doorframe with her coffee. You all are going to get soaked. That's the point, Matthew replied, already spraying the hose. The washing began in chaos, as it always had, soap, flying water arcing across the driveway, Benjamin pretending to trip just to make the boys laugh harder. This time, though, it was not a job. It was not a desperate plea for help. It was joy celebration, a full-circle moment washed clean by suds and sunlight. This time, it's just for fun, Matthew said, beaming, handing Benjamin a soaked sponge. Yeah, Marvin added, and you owe us ice cream after. Benjamin raised both hands in mock surrender. Deal. As they dried the car with towels too small for the task, Benjamin looked at Carolyn. She caught his gaze and smiled one of those quiet, knowing smiles that speak without words. They did not need to say anything. The journey was still fresh in their minds, the fear, the courtroom, the uncertainty. And yet, here they stood together. Benjamin picked up Matthew and spun him around until both were breathless. He watched Marvin and Carolyn high-five over the sparkling hood of the car. For the first time, Benjamin allowed himself to stop wondering whether he was doing enough. This moment was enough. These lives mattered, and somehow they had become intertwined not by obligation, but by choice. You know, Carolyn said softly as they sat on the stoop afterward, sun drying their soaked clothes, you've given us more than help. You gave us a new story. Benjamin looked out at the boys running in the grass. No, he said, you already had the story. I just showed up in time to be part of it. And with that, the silence between them felt full of laughter, of healing, of the kind of beginning only born from surviving the end. This story, like an old bridge weathered by time, reminds us that even when the world feels heavy or unfair, kindness can still carve a path forward, and maybe, just maybe, one small act of compassion can carry more weight than we ever imagined. If you've stayed with us until the end, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Your time, your attention, your presence here. It means everything. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Which corner of the world are you listening from tonight? If this story moved you, if it stirred something inside, let us know. Leave a comment, share your feelings, or simply say, I'm here. You are part of this story now too. A like or a subscription helps us keep building this bridge, one story at a time, one soul at a time. We are endlessly grateful for your support. Until the next chapter, stay kind, stay human, and we'll see you in the next story.